Hey guys, we're talking about Willy Boy today. He doesn't get enough attention, so I'm going to talk about him. Now, I'll be the first to admit, from the moment Wyll opened his mouth, I tuned out. His way of speaking just doesn't mesh well with my ADHD, okay? He's very soft-spoken, and I am just used to yelling, apparently. But he has a compelling storyline, and he is a character that has room for growth as an individual. Unfortunately, as the game progressed, I kept feeling underwhelmed. I largely believe this is because Wyll was overlooked by Larian. In this video, we're going to dive into Wyll's storyline and analyze his character. My goal here is to understand why our boy Willy is so often considered boring. Is it the player's perception, or is Larian to blame? Is there an underlying bias in how certain characters are written? These are the questions I've been asking myself, so let's get into it. When we first meet Wyll, it's clear to see he's the noble type. In his introductory cutscene, he swoops in to save the day with a bold catchphrase, "Provoke the blade and suffer its sting."
Damnable roach! Provoke the blade and suffer its sting.
Not long after, we see him mentoring tiefling children in self-defense. Right away, the player gets a sense that Wyll is all about noble virtue.
It's always a noble virtue.
As a first impression, he comes off as the heroic type, and he deserves a lot of credit for this. After nearly dying on an illithid ship, and then immediately jumping into action to help strangers fight goblins, then teaching kids how to defend themselves? Mad respect, because I personally probably would be a mess. And on top of all that, still at the back of his mind, he's got the Advocatus Diaboli.
Shit! You saw her. Advocatus Diaboli.
On his mind, the very reason he was on that Mind Flayer ship. Willy asks us to help him kill Karlach. However, when he points his rapier at her and Tav has a vision, we the player are given the choice to stop him. The vision reveals that Karlach is just another pawn to Zariel. The narrator explains that her blade was raised, slicing through devils, Zariel's servants, as she desperately seeks an escape. Despite this, Wyll refuses to believe it. As Karlach pleads her case, Wyll retorts, "You served her, that's enough to damn you."
Don't believe her lies.
You saw the truth. I never wanted to serve Zariel. I was enlisted in her army against my will. Forced to fight, and fight I did. When I saw an opportunity to get away, I took it. Finally home. Or near it, anyway.
You served her. That's enough to damn you.
The Blade of Frontiers was insistent it was entirely by Karlach's choice, contradicting what we've seen in the vision. Now, one thing that continually frustrated me throughout Baldur's Gate 3 was Wyll's linear thinking. He tends to see the world in black and white, leaving little room for nuance. This narrow-minded perspective seems to come from his need to be noble, with a rigid idea of good versus evil. To his credit though, he does own up to his mistake, suggesting he'll soon pay his penance.
Witness to a pantomime, I'm sorry to say. And I've played my part all too poorly. I can say only this. Karlach's not the only one who's had a villain's knife held to their throats.
Gods, what now? Do you have a tax collector on your tail?
You're closer than you think. One night soon when we make camp, the veil will be lifted. And I'll pay my penance.
As the gang prepares to rest for the night, we come face to face with the Cambion named Mizora. It quickly becomes evident that Wyll is under her control when she refers to him as her
Pup here has been unruly.
And yanks on an imaginary leash that pulls him forward. As he grasps his neck, it's a stark symbol of Mizora's ownership over him. Soon, flames ignite around Wyll, revealing that he has made a pact with the devil. To make matters worse, because he refused to kill Karlach, he's branded with a pair of devilish horns. At this point in Wyll's story, it seems strange that the heroic Blade of Frontiers would make such a pact. As the night unfolds, Wyll wrestles with the realization that even the right actions come with consequences. "Just look at me," he says. "I did what was right and Mizora made me pay for it."
God's damn her straight back to the hells. Just look at me. I did what was right, and Mizora made me pay for it.
Here we start to see a shift as Wyll begins to realize that the world isn't just black or white. He was under the impression he'd be hunting devils and demons, traitors and hypocrites, not Zariel's victims, not innocent tieflings. Now he's starting to understand that just because someone is working under Zariel doesn't mean that they're there by choice. In a different cutscene, we do learn the clause of his pact, which is
Clause G, Section 9. Target shall be limited to the infernal, the demonic, the heartless, and the soulless. Karlach meets the criteria by virtue of having no heart.
It makes me wonder, were there other instances where Mizora twisted the pact to make Wyll slay innocents? Karlach had no heart, so therefore she was included in the criteria. However, what I think Wyll fails to realise, heartless does not necessarily mean evil, and that's the defining word here. And the same goes for soulless, because you can be in a situation like Wyll and get yourself into a bad pact like Wyll. And honestly, I firmly believe that this naivety comes from a result of making his pact at such a young age. Wyll is still quite young, and I believe that's where that sense of heroism comes from. When you're young, you have this sense of invulnerability that you can take on the world. It eventually goes. It's starting to go in me, where life just feels depleting. And this idea is further shown as the conversation progresses, where Wyll states that he doesn't regret his decision. Wyll believes it was the right choice.
But I'll say this. The moment I pacted myself to Mizora, I have not regretted for a heartbeat. It was my proudest deed. It was worth the sacrifice. All I can give you on that is my solemn word.
But he does admit Mizora makes a mockery of everything the Blade stands for.
The bullshit she pours, the more of it I'm forced to swallow. Mizora set me on fiends inside and outside the hells. She's never ordered a rescue. Gods, she makes a mockery of everything the Blade stands for. Such an asshole.
This demonstrates Wyll's internal struggle with his own heroism and the hypocrisy that comes along with the pact he made when he was young. Wyll's past actions are coming back to haunt him. Now, what frustrates me is that this is where it stops. We don't get a lot of self-reflection and growth from Wyll here. Wyll firmly believes he chose the right path without considering the grey areas that come along with that. He doesn't reflect on the possibility that maybe the result of the pact would have made Mizora give him targets that weren't completely evil, especially after the revelation he just had with Karlach. Wyll seems to fail to grasp that while his actions might have been the right thing at that moment, they did have tremendous implications for his future, and it's such a naive outlook on the world. And this is especially true when we take into account that he is essentially facing a form of abuse and enslavement through his pact, yet Wyll chooses to create this positive bubble around himself. We've seen that he's on Mizora's leash, essentially a slave to her, and he doesn't seem to take that reality seriously enough. So while what he did might have been right in that moment, the repercussions certainly weren't worth it. I also want to add, considering Wyll's race, Larian had the opportunity to explore deeper racial issues, and while they are a European gaming company, and race is more heavily focused in the United States, the term ethnicity is more commonly used in Europe and Australia. Racism is still a systemic issue everywhere. Larian could have provided a more meaningful representation for people of colour, but they didn't, and it's disappointing to say the least. I find it even stranger because there's so much racism in the game directed towards drows and such, yet it lacks discussion on real racial issues. And yes, D&D is a fantasy realm, but it was created by people. And also, I have seen TikToks where racism exists in the D&D space. And until there are no mods where Wyll is transformed into a white person, then maybe race should be discussed in the video game. It's 2024, guys. Why are we still here? Seriously. A pivotal part of Wyll's storyline is locating his father, Duke Ravengard. The player learns that they are estranged. It's clear that Wyll still deeply cares for him. It isn't until we meet the big three that Wyll decides to open up about his past. He explains that at 17, his father was called away to
Elturel
to help settle a dispute. Soon after he left, the Cult of the Dragon made its move, and Wyll allows us to glimpse into his mind to see what happened. We come to finally understand that Wyll made a pact with Mizora to save Baldur's Gate. One soul for one city, as he puts it. For Wyll, it seemed that there was no other way to save the city. It's become very apparent that Wyll has that it's for the greater good mentality, and this is how he defines his sense of nobility. His rigid view of what is right or wrong seems to serve his purpose of what he believes he is doing for the greater good. Thus, he believes his pact with Mizora and everything that comes along with it is right, because the reason he made the pact was for the greater good and it was the right thing to do. Perhaps that's why we don't really see Wyll acknowledge the fact that he's enslaved by Mizora, that he's on her leash. I'm more inclined to think that it's not his fault at all. Of course, it comes down to the writing produced by the studio. I read somewhere on Reddit that Larian had rewritten Wyll's storyline during early access. Maybe it was due to time constraints, but here we are a year later, and Wyll's content still feels largely ignored. He's a character with so much potential to comment on real-world issues, yet he's been largely overlooked. This isn't only for Mizora's aspect of his storyline either. However, there is some redemption in the writing of Wyll's story. One part where the player truly gets to witness the raw emotion that Wyll feels is when he talks about his father. After we learn about the battle that saved Baldur's Gate, we finally uncover what Wyll considers the tragic element of his story, the loss of his relationship with his father. Because Wyll was bound by the pact and could not speak of it, he was unable to explain to his father what had happened with Mizora. Duke Ravengard had no idea about the deal Wyll had made. Wyll describes the moment he showed his father his stone eye, only for Duke Ravengard to turn away. When Wyll recounts his father's final words to him, "Go," you can hear a deep pain in his voice.
He returned to an unsuspecting city and a wayward son with a smirking devil at his side. I tried to tell him the truth, but my mouth couldn't form the words. I'd led him to the battlefield, but Mizora had swept it clean. I showed him my stone eye, but he only turned away. After, he said only one word: "Go." So I did.
Now this is where things get strange, because when Mizora gives him the choice to break his pact, and she does so by suggesting he needs to kill his father, his reaction is rather underwhelming. He simply states, "Tomorrow I celebrate my gain, today I mourn my loss."
But freedom will be paid in my father's blood. Tomorrow I celebrate my gain. Today, I mourn my loss.
A moment passes. In the stillness, you find a mote of tranquility.
The narrator then adds that in the stillness, there's a mote of tranquility. It raises the question, perhaps Wyll felt crushed by his father's expectations, but up until this point he has shown nothing but reverence towards his father, and yet this is the response we were given. It's hard to believe that someone who was exiled by the person they loved most wouldn't let their mask slip even for a moment, yet Wyll merely describes the moment as bittersweet.
I never knew freedom could taste so bittersweet.
Wyll's character seems complex with layers waiting to be explored, but the writing just doesn't deliver on that potential. You can save Duke Ravengard even if you choose to break Wyll's pact. In the cutscene that follows, Wyll gets the chance to explain that everything was a misunderstanding, and the two finally have a moment to mend old wounds.
It isn't what you think. It never was.
You turned your back on me, on your city, to chase the she-devil and her power.
She stinks up the place even now.
It is exactly what I think.
Ravengard's tadpole clenches as your memories and Wyll's flow into him.
My tears wounds. I'm in your mind.
The Grand Duke sees Mizora and her infernal sisters. He sees the agony in Wyll's face as an impossible choice is set before him.
No. My son.
The past becomes present, and Wyll's thoughts are laid bare. Ravengard sees Wyll partnering with Mizora to defeat Tiamat's cultists before they could lay siege to Baldur's Gate, and he sees everything beyond. The Nautiloid journey, the perilous path to Moonrise, the astral prism, and the Emperor within.
Well, everything I did for Baldur's Gate. I did for you.
My son. You sold your soul to save Baldur's Gate, and I cast you out for it. You gave yourself to the Hell's eternal fires so I might walk free. By the gods. Can you ever forgive me?
I have to say, this was probably the most emotional scene I've seen from Wyll. Maybe it's just my own daddy issues talking, but it definitely tugged on the heartstrings a bit. Unfortunately, that's where the emotion ends. The rest of Wyll's storyline feels lackluster, mostly just a motivational speech from his father. We then get to slay a dragon, and the quest falls short in numerous ways. The only redeeming aspect is that Wyll finally gets a chance to choose his own path in life, one free from the influence of Mizora or his father. But beyond that, there isn't much to keep the player invested in Wyll, unless you romance him. There's a sweet romance scene where Tav and Wyll get to hanky-panky, but we're not focusing on that. Wyll reveals to Tav that his true enemy is time. Yes, time.
But I've only now come to see who my true enemy's been. So you'd think, but the right answer is much simpler than that. Time.
After everything he's been through, Wyll still refuses to acknowledge the trauma and hardship he's faced. Maybe I'm just being pessimistic, but I don't believe anyone who has essentially lost their mother, was exiled, and enslaved by a devil at 17 would remain this optimistic in life. It feels so unrealistic in a game where I feel like a lot of the characters' trauma is shown pretty well. Why is Wyll's just overlooked so much? So much. We do not do him justice. Perhaps Larian wanted to create a traditional hero, but even heroes fall before they rise. They often are the ones who start in the deepest pits. This is why I believe so many players tend to overlook Wyll. He had so much potential, but Larian didn't deliver. He deserved a more compelling storyline, and so did the players. People say Astarion fans are spoiled, and honestly, we kind of are. With patch 7, we got that creepy Ascended Astarion kiss that, let's be real, glamorizes the cycle of abuse. But we still get Astarion content. Now it's time for Wyll content, please. The good news is though, with the official mod support and the new BG3 toolkit, who knows, maybe Wyll will finally get the depth of character he deserves by some modders. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, tell me your thoughts. What do you think of Wyll? Do you think Larian paid enough attention to him? Do you think he's boring? Some people think he's boring. I think he just talks a bit slow. That's about it. I talk slow though, so maybe we just don't get along. But yeah, anyway, see you guys next time. Ciao! Don't forget to check out my last vids.